Headphones on. Now we should be okay. Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to, I guess, today's episode. Culture is a program, I find. And I find when there's more to this program, then you can acknowledge a sort of cultural illusion at work. The reason I've said contemplating the wilderness of cultural illusions is because wilderness can be said to be something that its intensity appears so quick that it's uncontrollable. It's a sudden intensity. So another way of kind of saying the title of this episode is human beings that are alive now wondering about, how can I tell you, it's like the immediate program that gives them meaning also requires a sort of intensity to respond to. A wild animal, we can say, can attack man. And I find similar ideologies found in cultures can attack people as well. Any space you go in, you get defined by the light of that room. It's similar with talking to people. Any person you are around, in some sense, you start basking in the glow of their mind. What do we do with a world where the program changes endlessly? You had a time machine, you went back in time, you would have access to a totally different cultural program. Even if you relocated now without even a time machine, you would have access to various cultural programs. And you'll eventually see what has kept culture alive. And Terence Mckenna gives us a very interesting pointer here. He says that culture evolves as fast as its language does. You see, that means if culture is something that is engineered, the engineers are using the sort of positioning of language to keep it there. That means I'm trying to bring an attention that how much of your world is linguistic and how much of that, the language of your mind, has to do with the access that the cultural program provides for you. The thing is, the reason we have the concept of illusion is because we couldn't see the whole thing. It's like a person running at the end of a hallway and noticing there's others running from the other end of the hallway towards the person, and then the person goes and hits a mirror in this dark hallway. I find anything you don't know the value of, you either miss out on or you don't see, or even if you find it, you won't know how long to hold on to it. I ask myself, if I get defined by the programs external to me, by the phenomena external to me, if I let culture define my freedom, if I let society I will in some sense feel as if I have stepped into a world rather than the world has seen the world behind my eyes. So you see, we human beings don't have just certain challenges in regards to physical continuity, but we have challenges towards subjective continuity. And the thing is, subjective survival is not similar to objective survival. Objective survival, you got to be strong, be aware of the environment, and the hunt begins, the hunter gathering kind of mindset. You continue, you compete with the challenges of the objective world. But in regards to the survival of the subjective reality, it's also like something where you got to kind of give food, So what I mean by that is okay, hold on, I made myself laugh. The subjective survival, when I say you got to give food, I mean literally you got to feed your mind with continuity. And continuity appears through different potentials. So when I tell you, think about your future right now, your future will most likely come across to you as a potential. It's as if it's an activity. I've asked myself, let's say I could know the future. Let's say I could know it every day. What kind of day would that be? And I would realize it's like the test, like if mankind reached the full potential, he would not have free will. It's as if there will come a destruction of the free will in any extremeness of worshipping a sort of language or cultural program. It's very easy, guys. You get defined by the environment you're in. If you stand in front of like the smoke of a campfire that's gone out, your sweater is going to smell like, ash, And it's one of those things where how you stand holds the world. You see, the body, you can stand up, you can sit, but the mind is simply present or not present. That's how it appears to itself. It's either here or it's not here. And if it's here, there is freedom. That means free will is like the child taken to the park. The child can do whatever it wants in the park, but it can't, the parent is driving the car back home. So in some sense, what I'm saying is that our free will is a product of our own creation, set loose, allowed to play in a world with already prior design. So this is why we have to become responsible for the creative dimensions of our intelligence, because where that creative expression moves is also part of the creative intelligence. That means you're choosing what pants to wear, and in another, in another sense, that should suggest how deep your pockets are. You can say beliefs are like clothing. You wear a certain belief a day, in certain environments, in certain moments. You see, the body is objective, I find. The mind is subjective and beyond. That means there's more to life than objects and subjects moving in space. There will come the effort of design. Now, what it is that we as human beings, it's kind of like your body working with your mind and your body working with other minds. The environment will appear as another mind, but what you can move and control and is in your conscious range will appear as you. So I kind of notice what I'm calling myself is a snapshot in time of a certain evaluation or a certain way I'm seeing value. Now, something strange happens, especially when you look into the philosophy of language, because you begin to see the imposition of the symbol. There's this old man, this old farmer, and one day, every day the neighbors would come and talk to him. And this farmer, one day, he had a horse, and his horse runs away from the stable. And the neighbors come to him the next day, and they're like, "Oh my God, man, you're so unlucky. Your only horse ran away. What are you gonna do now?" And they tell the guy he's unlucky, and he's like, "I don't know, maybe I'm unlucky, maybe not. How do you know? That kind of mentality." And so what happens is, like, a few days later, that horse that ran away runs back with like a group of other horses, like three other horses. So it's as if all the neighbors come and see, holy shit, this guy now has four horses. Like in one moment what seemed unlucky now has become the luckiest thing ever. And so the neighbors go up to him and they're like, "Oh my God, you old farmer, like you're so lucky. You're so lucky. Random horses. You got three random horses. And then at that moment, he suddenly says, the farmer says, "How do you know I'm lucky? Maybe." And what happens is, his son is riding one of the horses, you know, and his son falls down and breaks his leg, and all the neighbors gather around and they're like, "Oh my God, man, you're so unlucky. Your only son broke his leg. And then what happens is, it's like a few days later, the military comes to recruit soldiers, and it comes and recruits everybody's son, all the sons of the neighbors, except this guy's son who had a broken leg and was pretty much, didn't have utility for the military. After the recruiting process is over, the neighbors, all kind of shocked and sad, come up to the farmer and they're like, "You are so fucking lucky that your only son didn't have to go to war where it becomes a coin flip of livelihood." So you see, it's as if you can't give the variable value. Every time you give it a value, it changes in meaning. Anytime you make a different decision, the texture of the illusion changes. I ask myself, sometimes I feel something I had the habit of doing when I was younger was that I think my subconscious had the arrogance of wanting to be God because I was in a religious environment. So the ego was trying to surpass its limit. And of course, I'm saying this. Nobody's ever in one state of mind. This is why you can't judge yourself too hard. You got to be playful with thought. If you take thought too seriously, you trap yourself in a room of image, and it's unnecessary because your intelligence is here to navigate and pilot through various images. So you see, I speak about the concept of piloting in a different way. You see, I have learned. I'll say it like this: it's not something I've learned. I've remembered. I've remembered a sort of freedom in the ability of experience to define thought rather than thought to define the limits of experience. So what that means is it's pretty much how you're interpreting nature that's suggesting what's happening to you. Because I thought about karma a lot, guys, and I realized, wait a minute, the karma is always limited to the understanding of the person. That means even if something good is happening, if the person can't identify that pattern, it doesn't matter. So if it's all dependent on the ability to identify patterns in the moment, you can identify any pattern. That means any person who's kind of said, "Oh my God, this world is a bad place," they could have simultaneously, there could have been someone in that moment or a parallel version of them saying, "Oh my God, this is a great place." And of course, since I'm kind of playful with language and ideology, my metaphysical you see, stories tend to define the unknown if you don't go into it experientially. You know what that means? That means it's kind of like the mistake that many esoteric societies make when they approach spirituality. They take the it's like it's, you know what it is? It's kind of like esoteric societies are before Buddha. Before Buddha, there was a lot of Brahmanism going on, a lot of ceremonial, kind of ritualistic, meaningless ritualistic behavior. It's as if people weren't worshiping objects, but they were worshiping their ritualistic behavior. They thought their ritualistic behavior was access to something, right? But Buddha kind of came around and he saw a lot of people doing nonsense. See, that's something about Buddha's life people don't see, but they think, oh, no, Buddha just said, control your thoughts and be happy, People think that's what Buddha said. But no, Buddha was, he was born in a time, even the concept of meditation outdated the Buddha. The Buddha just was a new patch on the phone, not the new phone. Now, the Buddha, there's a story that he tried many methods. It wasn't he just sat by a tree and it just happened. His questions took him, and he had to kind of reverse engineer back to his conditioning. Because your conditioning is given to the world, you will eventually have to know a bit of history to step out of your belief. You got to have other reference points, pretty much. And Mr. Within is saying the reference point is usually a temporal, subjective one. We should bring it to a direct experiential one. It's like the street smart approach to eternity. It works with negation. So what does that mean? The street smart approach to eternity is that if it's not temporal, then what else could it be? It has to be eternal. Because if intelligence just wants to continue, it doesn't have to evolve. It just doesn't have to change. Do you know what I mean? The world that you feel is conscious to you is a box. That's all I'm saying. It's a box of thought. We are living in programs of accepted forms of reality. Now, the easiest way to deny truth is by asking the wrong question, I find. And when you ask the right question, all unauthentic moments that have aligned to that phenomena fade. That means, imagine there's a person, and this person in his whole, her or his, whatever it's, I'm just creating an example here. Like, this person has been approached by many people, but no one has honestly spoken to this person. So this person has not found another person who they can trust, for example, right? So it's another way of saying the mind hasn't learned to trust where it is yet. On some level, it's a story comparison game. That's what knowledge is. Because the certainty of the data is, in a changing world, you can't be too certain. That means on some level, I'm even convinced that we can't even time travel even if we made the technology, because we will not be the same self. Literally, there is more data in the sphere of awareness. Therefore, the sphere of awareness can never experience the past like the past. You can't experience the past unless you didn't know what the future was. But if you're coming from the future to the past, that's not the same past. So if there was the notion of time travel, it's a glass orb moving around colored surfaces. So the orb has no color. Your consciousness has no material. Your consciousness is not material phenomena. It is what material phenomena seems to be leading to. I say this because I've realized it's not about which flag is held the highest, which banner is kept the highest. Life is not about pride. Pride doesn't help the civilization at this point. If it's trying to own, that means if I wanted to take from the unknown, I would take it and immediately feed the ego. What that means is right now I'm existing in the moment. The action that is happening in the moment, it can influence the ideological self, my subjective self, or it could just remain as an objective self. This is what I didn't realize when I was younger. This is why the world had a sophistication that it was like one of those problems where you've put the box over your head, right? So the way it changes is that either your world has to change in value, or your sense of self has to change in value. Albert Einstein tells us you cannot solve a problem with the same level of consciousness that created it. And we look at human beings nowadays in 2019, and everybody has some sort of problem they're dealing with. Like the purpose of their day is to handle their problems to get by, right? So if Albert Einstein's saying is like you can't do it with the same level of consciousness that created the problem, that means the moment you saw the problem and the state of mind and how the world was valid when you saw that problem, that world has to change. And those people who understand this world is allowed to change, they can move very swiftly in it. Not everything that happens changes them. So they don't have to constantly ask the question over and over again, you know? Once you get rooted in your direct experience, your intelligence works differently. You know, it's like before you had to maybe sit down and think about something, and after a couple minutes of contemplation, then you had a picture to share. But I'm telling you, it's literally like the pictures are moving. Sometimes when I give these talks, a way I've explained it to people is like what's occurring behind my eyes is literally like I've taken a flashlight at night and I've putting that sphere of light of the flashlight on some part of a river. So the content of the river is moving. So you see, we can only want evidence from the world, evidence as proof, if we are superior to what we are experimenting. We can be certain of the evidence outside of it, but certain philosophical questions you can't experiment. Literally, it's like you can't give proof because it's self wondering about self, not self wondering about other. What it is people are living another life behind their eyes, and it is actually the value of that life they care. We are caring for our inner lives more than our outer lives, and because we are caring for our inner lives, we're ignoring outer value. So there comes a time, I thought it's like, oh man, we're materialistic kind of. I felt this materiality was something to transcend. Then I realized it's just a countercultural reaction to the ideas of the time. That means there is nothing right and there is nothing wrong with stardust moving in space. It is man's mind. It is humanity's advancement that has dared tell its story to itself. That means humanity is like this grand story you know? And who is here to hear the story? Only humanity. We are performers on stage, but we're also the audience member. And that is the major feedback loop that's required for suddenly the engines. Literally, you see your intelligence. It's like once you trust your intelligence, something strange happens. It opens up to you. It's kind of like, you know, it's like being with a friend, and just as you are abiding by a state of simplicity, it's like complexity can't. Your truthfulness brings about truthfulness in others because you are starting the attention at that reality. I remember I wrote a sentence down for myself. Some of the greatest moments in this life I've had is writing words on paper, you know. And I remember writing this sentence that I don't want to live in a world that looks the same the next day. It's like, you know, the guy's living in life and people are shouting, change, 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 man, change. And the person's like, wait a minute, isn't everything changing? I think what really brings contentment is the realization life is not something that has a solution to. It's a process, it's a living thing, it's dynamic. It's too dynamic to be just put into words. And so Mr. Within is here in case anybody in this civilization suddenly notices there's experiences occurring beyond the language threshold. Because the issue is, there is too many voices in one moment. It's either truth is cut up into so many pieces, or if you choose to go into each individual piece, you'll eventually see the same truth. Kind of like how some poets said, truth is like a shattered mirror, where every tiny piece of the mirror is reflecting what is seeing it. You know, it is part of creative freedom to be destructive. That means kind of like you just look at your body, like, you know, you have to just not be worried about survival, but also you can say waste management, or how you handle the chaos approaching you through the day and how you handle order approaching you through the day. Usually when pain comes in, life is, it's like literally you have the karma of your animalistic instincts guiding you. You know, so after a certain point of intensity, the human psychology is fragile, but it doesn't mean it's weak. Just because something's fragile, it doesn't mean it's weak. So an example would be as if like there is many layers to the person, and even though their expression is fragile, and their sense of self could shatter due to an experience, but there's other layers. There's other kind of states of certainty prior to any sort of uncertainty that appears. Because life is, two things are primarily happening to this consciousness in the waking state of life. Okay, so we got to think about studying phenomenology, not just only in the waking state, but in the dream state, and even wondering about, wait a minute, in deep sleep, is there even a self? Deep sleep seems to be a moment where the philosopher's consciousness is unnecessary to livelihood. Right? So I'm telling you, this world works perfectly if we never could talk, if we never had an opinion on it. And it's, why do we, it's like, why do we we can say a rock, like a boulder, or let's say a tree, is made of atoms, and we look at other people and everybody's made of atoms. So why is it that people don't talk to trees, they talk to human beings? Because the potential to receive. So what that means is you can say a lion is more intelligent maybe than a gazelle when it can hunt the gazelle. Okay? But a lion is not as intelligent as the human being that can hunt that lion. So what I'm telling you is you are at a level of evolutionary design where your self-worth is arising from you looking at what is inferior to you. Most people, their psychologies, anytime there's greed, is because the person was pushed when they were younger and they have to make sure now they stand up. They have to prove themselves to themselves. That is what the issue with the past. An example of this would be like there was this video, I remember I was shaking my head. It was kind of sad, it was hard to watch. The video was of a group of people who had succeeded. They were all successful, making, great salaries in the video. One of them and in the video, these grown people, people like close to the age of like, late 30s, you can say. These people were looking in the camera and saying to the bully, to the kid that bullied them in school, and they were like, "Hey bully, I succeeded." Like, excuse me, but they were like, another way of paraphrasing, it's like they were saying like, "Fuck you bully, I succeeded, this is my salary," And I was like, oh my God, this person has lived so many years of life after that incident, but the inspiration of their new moment of life is because of their past. That means they're still receiving orders and instructions from the past. Anytime you're trying to keep the past alive, you're missing out on the future. Anytime you try to keep the future alive, you see you've forgotten the past. It's just the nature of attention. You can't be in all rooms at once, but you can navigate between the rooms. And sometimes when you navigate at very high speeds between different rooms of thought, the two thoughts merge. I find that the contemplation of knowledge has to do with the experience of knowledge and its speed. You can say life was just speed of an elemental existence. Then there came direction. So it's as if consciousness is like velocity. It's speed with direction, with an awareness to itself. But prior to that, there was things moving. There were many programs of nature occurring. It was just that the context of how we could engage them wasn't there. So man is not just exploring the world. Man is also valuing his explorations in accordance to what he knows. When I say man, I mean mankind. I mean our civilization. I mean the Homo sapien. I'm simply trying to think if every these 8 billion creatures on this, on this rock, if all of them did the best thing they could, if individual responsibility was maxed out to its efficiency, everything was perfect, what then? So pretty much, I'm that guy on earth asking what then after we've all gotten into heaven. And you'll eventually realize the value is just the potential of what you could have done earlier. Some can say, some have said that in some sense the reason, like in Buddhic thought and yogic thought, karma is taken seriously. They're not as playful as I am with material existence. They think material existence is an illusion. We've had certain Zen masters like Bodhidharma, the dude scolds a king and then goes outside the palace wall and like his face, his forehead inches away from a wall, starts meditating. The reason his face is inches away from the wall is because he wants to see nothing, to have a desire to be in the world. It's kind of like it's in the psychology where the moment somebody who is in a space where they don't have value wants to leave that space, all those people in that space, anytime you feel left behind, you give higher value to the other, right? And trust me, it's programs. literally like that guy in the Matrix who was seeing codes on the computer screen, I could totally understand how those codes were enough to justify what was happening in the Matrix. I could totally understand why that guy was looking in the code, because a lot of behaviors are repetitive. Maybe the energetic expression of them is new, but a lot of things that the person is doing, it's like they may think it appears new, but then you go to see that the world has seen more of itself. You know, arguments can be made that it could be even crucial for us as a civilization to try to build a cloud kind of network where all our memories gets connected to. So it's kind of literally, you can say there was a physical evolution, but the peak of the physical evolution was the subjective evolution, and then the peak of the subjective evolution is in some sense seeing the opposite of both. Kind of like you experience being a creature in a world, then it's like you're going to experience being the world and the creature. So we are taking turns in being each other's minds. Right now, I am being the embodied expression of this universal sector, but there will be moments it's as if I have also been the mind of the moment. So you might right now think that your intelligence is limited to your brain, so it's just in your head. You may think that. But you're going to realize the purpose of what's in the head is, it seems to be evidently through communication and the endeavors of art to be something to be step out. So it's as if there is this self living inside you that wants to step out. And every time it thinks it's an idea, it tries to be that and then sees there's the next, there's the next, there's the next. So either you have to shift, kind of like Albert Einstein said, the state, you got to find a state of consciousness that is different from the state of consciousness that created the problem. So literally you have to trust the unknown to change you into a new angle of seeing the same thing. And so Buddha, there's a story of him where he's walking, and he sees these people who've tied ropes to their legs and are just hanging from a tree. And Buddha's like, what are you guys doing? And the guys were like, yo man, we're doing our holy ritual. In this way we connect to God. This is our way of connecting to God, And Buddha was like, you guys aren't truth seekers. You guys are bats, You guys are Batman, Batman, But pretty much what I'm saying is the Buddha saw that saw the hollowness in their ceremonial ritualistic intent. And the Buddha even went and he did this practice, which was incredibly an ascetic practice, where he's literally, these dudes in ancient times, their mindsets were so savage that it's as if they had this mentality of, by the person getting closer to dying, they see truth, right? So they would pretty much like fast endlessly to alter their state of consciousness, and eventually realize it was like the worst mistake. So what happens is the Buddha gets to a point where he hasn't eaten for so long, he can't get up. He can't even move. And, as the story says, this random girl appears out of nowhere and brings him a bowl of rice when he realizes that truth is not death. And truth is not just life. He noticed that there is this kind of, in this existential program, a sort of game of suffering occurring. He felt it was external. He felt there was no solution to suffering because the suffering is being caused from outside of you. But when he sat down by the tree, he eventually realized the free will is here. And what is the point of the free will? The reinterpreter of the value. The reinterpreter of the value. That means somebody's given you something and told you to hold it in a certain way. Then you realize it doesn't matter how you hold it. You're holding it, So it doesn't matter after some point what you know. It's about how that knowledge flows through your life, how it moves, how the winds of evolution animate thought for you and make thought inanimate. Because we can say on some level, a super young child looking at a teddy bear and being like, yo, this is my best friend. The child's mind brings the toy to life. Or it doesn't matter. It's like when you see, you don't have people's eyes, but on some level, you have seen enough similarity between your existence and their existence to consider how their sight is. But what I'm saying is it's the same thing being done to the teddy bear is being done to every other objective phenomena. We are bringing it into life. Suddenly objects weren't just objects, they had names. You know, this object in front of me wasn't just an object anymore, it was called a cup, you know? So we are subconsciously living in another world behind our eyes, which is subjectively oriented and its freedoms are different. That means in front of me, I can throw an object in the air and gravity pulls it down. But I can close my eyes and just imagine that object, or even just while my eyes are open, just imagine that object just hovering in the air against the laws of gravity. That means if I conduct an experiment in my imagination, there is more freedom in it than me conducting an experiment in front of my eyes. So me conducting an experiment behind my eyes, there's more freedom to it. You know, it's as if the laws of the universe are different for imagination. You know, this is why visualization is so instantly you can think of something, you know. And to be honest, it's like you keep life in a relationship. When you keep life in a sort of relationship, in a sort of blueprint or framework you're looking at it, eventually that framework will provide options for decisions. And decisions have to be made. That means it's like when I was younger, I thought that, okay, even let's say if the person is a soul, okay, and the soul is some unknown eternal presence that never was born and can never die. It's like you can say energy is another word for soul, you know? That means before the concept of, you know, the scientific explanations of energy were kind of like how a scientist understands the word energy is literally how back in the day they saw the idea of soul, something that cannot be created or destroyed but changes, it transmigrates between life to life, right? So it's I'm telling you, it's like life is there's a lot of things repeating. It's like history is recycling itself, or the mind of man is recycling history. I don't know, could be the latter. I find that we are moving past a paradigm of thinking of truth seeking. So I've noticed that truth seekers have been seeking truth so long that eventually they've come into a position where we're wondering if the mind knows itself or it doesn't. If you are honest, you will have the answer instantaneously and you will see, do you know yourself or do you not know yourself? If you ask that question from yourself in a silent, you know, some moment of solitude, natural solitude, every voice walks from its own world into the common world. Sometimes you have to go against the herd. This doesn't mean an externalized social rebellion. It means an inner revolution. That means you wonder about how evolution has had a value. You look at the laws of nature, you acknowledge change, you realize the possibility of even, like after 4 billion years, this intelligence is here and it can do stuff. And people are like, what is the meaning of life? And life is just passing by as they're stuck in boxes of belief. It's like language is not the only thing here. Language is a technology. You know, I am telling you, we are right now like fire worshippers. I consider how language entered you know, the stream of how language entered our lives was similar to like how fire was discovered. It was literally, we evolved to a point where we could use and behave in the moment in a way where it had more significance, right? Because what's the difference between someone shouting and then someone shouting a word? You know, they're both expressions of sound, but one is a more fine-tuned, adjusted version that it's like once the word enters your ear, it just imagery just appears for it. I find style, the question of style has to do with rhythm. And I find that when life becomes more an internal responsibility, you become more, it like your psychology allows you to cause things in your moment. Most people are under the effects of communication. I'll tell you something that's super fascinating. Language is such a unique technology that when we look at the concept of magic, for example, in fantasy writings and also in movies, and in some sense just the concept of it, it had to do with spells and spelling. So what that meant is the language that entered the awareness of the creature defined the creature as much as its environment. So this is why it's like if the words you hear suggest the walls of your potential. The cool thing about writing is whenever you pick up the pen, the fingers move in accordance to how the personality has been evoked in that moment. You know, it's kind of like how Heraclitus said, no man steps in the same river twice, and it's not the same man, it's not the same river. So it's a new relationship of self in every moment. So rather than you thinking you're one thing, you're realizing the mind is a multidimensional presence. The body is a singular dimensional presence. The body is simply built, it's kind of like waves, ocean waves. The waves come up and the waves go down. So similarly, human existence and evolutionary force manifests, it extends, and literally the wave goes down. So by acknowledging this is how life is, we realize that we don't try to run away from the end into false beginnings. You, you know, aside from the world appearing as a reality machine, as a generator of realities, endless realities, I find that the purpose of life is awareness of position. You know, I would run after, not run after, I would kind of like try to conquer knowledge. That means when I was younger, I had such a ridiculous ego that I felt I wanted to know, I wanted to see a version of the world that was the most accurate. And I dwelled in the words of others. I dwelled in the words of myself. I looked at life in many ways. Every day I picked up whatever kind of weapon of ideology I had, and I marched at this unknown problem until one day I realized the question came from the unknown. And when I realized the question came from the unknown, it was a moment where literally the energetic presence of my being was acknowledged. I was acknowledging how energy is allowed to be present regardless of linguistic referral, like regardless of how you translate it. You are allowed to exist as design, and better yet, you, the Homo sapien, is conscious of its design. Now, what happens with this consciousness of design? What's the point of looking at a painting? Most likely the eyes will move the hand, and you will find it's like you cannot look at a great work of art and not want to draw an effort, because I have more energy as a mind in projecting a body than as a body howling a brain and a mind around. When I shift from various perspectives, various viewpoints, you kind of, when you tap into ego vision, you get an ability to not, kind of like how the eagle can see the whole forest from the sky, but can also land on a certain branch of knowledge. So similarly, it becomes one of those things where in every moment of your being, you can be defined by the content, what's in your moment, literally what happens in your moment, or you can be identified with the whole moment. That means you go ask a spiritual man to fill an identification form, you know, and you ask them all the questions, where do you live, all this stuff. The spiritual person doesn't even consider the materiality to be the effect, you know, because it has to do with what you consider yourself. You're always running towards the opposite. You know, what's happening, you know? Everybody is paying attention to what they don't have first rather than what they have. If you're being defined by what you don't have, you are literally there's better means of transport. The concept of freedom is lost. It's kind of like, let me tell you, Friedrich Nietzsche said God is dead and man killed him. And I'll tell you, you know what's going to die after God? Freedom. And you know what's going to die after freedom? The hollowness of the opportunity. That means when you could have done something, you didn't do it, so it was as if it didn't matter if the opportunity was given or not. It made no difference. This is why they say don't just exist in life, go live. Go, like, literally trust the unknown enough to explore the reality. I find we don't need teachers anymore in the world. We just need the mindsets of exploration. So platforms, stations of thinking. So what it is kind of like in a video game, you play the video game and you reach a certain checkpoint, for example. Okay, so we need these checkpoints. The issue is every person, you know, it's like they say, don't invent the wheel. You know, it's like you don't need to reinvent the wheel. You don't have to. I attempted to reinvent the wheel. No, I don't mean like the actual wheel. The wheel is a metaphor for a system, an intelligent system that's already here. You know, I tried to fly out of this world, and I ended up realizing it's very hard to fly out of your mind when the mind is choosing to fly. So what's going to happen is either you're going to stay in an individual mode of consciousness, either you're going to shift from this individual mode of consciousness to its opposite, which is a collective mode of consciousness, or you're going to leave the zone of free will. You're going to pilot out. You know how I consider very playfully, I say, you know, you got to be a pilot of consciousness in this life, and when the moment of dissolution comes of the elemental reality, you have to eject. You have to eject like the pilot from the plane of existence. So what that means is you are establishing in every action your relationship with the intelligence of the world. I'm telling you, intelligence it doesn't have to do just with content. It's not a conceptual thing. It's not like people are taking language and fighting other people with, you know, and they've picked up certain words and they're fighting with those words. Like it's not this language war is a waste of time. What is necessary is you taking a good look at what you see the world is honestly to you. And then you realizing, okay, this is the access. This is how the mind has given me something to choose. So from this, I choose. Something like that, you know. Because the mind is as much of a wonder of the world as the pyramids of Egypt. Don't think it's just the architecture of, you know, pyramids that's fascinating. The architecture of how our intelligence is even aware is fascinating. And it's fascinating because it's dynamic. And so that means the only way we can really understand the unconscious is by being able to have the conscious not be the only dictator of reality. So you literally have to trust more than you know in order for the unknown to reanimate the known. And the easiest way is to simply start with the simple. So it's like whenever you want to master something, you can't just go right away. You should, I think. I think the best thing is try to, as the Zen master says, like like they say, if you want to climb a mountain, start at the top of the mountain. So attempt greatness just to get a sense of where you are in relation to it. Feedback is just awareness to space. That's it. Sorry, not feedback. Failure is just awareness to space. That means this is life. Things are taken away, things are given, things are taken away, things are given. It's kind of like the weather. Your karma is like weather. So what do you do with the weather? You know, at best wear a coat. You get a strict belief system, kind of like how religion is that shield for some people for the kind of meaninglessness of life. It's like it's easier to believe that there is meaning than to truly see there not to be meaning. It takes of course there is a philosophical dimension to if man can ever conceptualize what nothing means, but the edge of meaning is not per se meaningless. Just because one system ends doesn't mean all systems in this universal sector have ended. You know, just because potential energy becomes kinetic energy doesn't mean the apocalypse has happened, you know? I want to read something that a person who really, his lectures brought, you know, his lectures kind of made me aware of how other people are seeing culture. He has this interesting, it's a long paragraph, and I'm going to read it for you. It's from a man named Terence Mckenna. He says every culture that's ever existed has operated under the illusion that it understood 95% of reality and that the other 5% would be delivered in the next 18 months. And from Egypt forward, they've been running around believing they had a perfect grip on things. And yet we look back at every society that preceded us with great smugness at how naive they all were. Well, it never occurs to us then that maybe we're whistling in the dark too, that the universe is stranger than you can suppose, and that openness, that perception imparts is a great joy. Okay, let me reread that. That the universe is stranger than you can suppose, and that openness, that perception imparts is a great joy, a great blessing, because then you can live your life not in service to some fascistic metaphor, but in service to the living mystery. The fact that you're not going to understand it, it's not going to yield to logic or magic or any other technique that's been developed. And he is so accurate here in this quote Terence Mckenna shared. It doesn't yield to the limited. You can't use a limited technology to wonder about the limitless. You can only wonder about the limits of the technology. So the technology human beings are using is language, and Mr. Within is saying, as we wonder about the source of language, we realize how much life is an experiential journey rather than a conceptual kind of value-based kind of spectrum ordeal. Spectrumized ordeal, you know? That means if there's other universes, the religious man is like, holy shit, other universes have apocalypses too? It's like, what? You know, like it becomes one of those things where the thought breaks as experience accelerates beyond limitation, simply said. So it's as if every person can be a new person. This is the weird thing. This is what Heraclitus meant, like you put your foot in the river, you take out your foot, you put your foot back in the river. It's not the same water particles. It's not the same river. And you have moved into a new view of space and time. So it's as if it's like you are a different self, you know? It's as if your feet, it's not the same feet that touch the water. So when we realize this constant change, what it means is we're becoming sensitive. That's like a million thoughts have been born and died or something, you know. It's perception. It's energy echoing. The system is inefficient, and we keep continuing in it, and nobody says anything. And nobody has said anything because the system is the way it is now. I was walking, I'm telling you, I'm not joking, I was walking downtown Toronto and I was looking at the stores. And I was like, is this the power, the greatest thing that a society can show of itself? I saw meaningless businesses. I have seen so many meaningless, some businesses I've walked past and I've kind of looked at it as if it's like the business is flawed in design. And I realized this is life. There's a bunch of resources, people are running after it, you know, and they're trying in any way they can. So it's never about the most intelligent idea. It's just whatever idea you need to get by. It becomes savage. You know, it's as if you lose the power of the narrative of humanity. Either people are trying to revert the world into a simplistic approach or into a complex approach, and the world changes. I remember in 2016, I found myself in Iran when I was visiting for the summer, my family members. And I find myself in this gathering in this downstairs of this kind of basement, this underground gathering where everybody's kind of like close to suited up and close, like business casual. And everybody there, it's like there's a lineup of people and they're all being introduced as master. Like Master A, Master B, Master C. Like all these people are being kind of defined as masters, right? And they come there, and the whole purpose of the gathering, it's that in Iranian culture, something unique has happened. Due to the incredible nature of hospitality and politeness, there has come a place where people can sit down. It's like, I'm telling you, Eastern cultures have preserved self-worth sometimes better than Western cultures. However, the whole gathering was a spiritual gathering, so pretty much everybody was there to talk about what the spirit could mean. Because and it's crucial to at least to understand it from a Persian culture's perspective, because there was a sort of invasion, a sort of massacre of cultural values. And in Persian culture, they had these great poets who were like, holy shit, the world is being forgotten, and they started like unleashing like hundreds of thousands of poetry, you know. So Persian culture has this, like one thing that's keeping the people kind of energized in that culture is the great poets that came from from Iran, you know, from before Iran, before like anyways. So I'm there sitting, and different people are coming. Some people are speaking for a long time, you know, and I had no intention to speak. I was sitting there as just a random person watching. But I had this weird feeling to go and ask someone what the Persian word for ego was, you know, and that guy told me manyat, you know. So I was like, okay, that's a good word. I need the Persian translation, right, in case. So what happens is everybody talks, and none of these people acknowledge the concept of the soul. None of them talk about it. It's like literally many of them are talking about energy. One of them was literally doing a martial art demonstration. And so it was, you know, I didn't see an acknowledgement of the important idea, you know. Anyways, last second as the last speaker, I'm asked to speak. And the guy gives me the microphone and tells me, and it's in one of these, it's it's like talk 438 of mine. I've uploaded like my father was filming it, you know, and I go there, and of course I'm not going to tell you the whole 8 minutes that I spoke, But I looked at them and I told them the purpose of the external master, even if you choose to see such an idea, if you choose to see such an idea, is to bring about the inner guru. That's it. The guru doesn't want you to follow it. The guru's like, what? Why? Like, you know, gurus should be look at their followers and be the hell like, why the hell are you guys here? You know, because it has to do with you realizing your response, your part in this cosmos, right? So it had you're returning to the self. It's an inner journey, right? It's literally the within part of, you know, who you are. You know, I remember the sentence I ended off that talk with, and I said that your only master is your moment of being, and it's the only thing that has been there with you from the beginning. I ended off the talk like that. And I kind of like, in my mind, I felt like Eminem, you know, slamming the mic down. But that's what I'm trying to say. You're giving external, you're allowing externality to influence you because you don't know what to do with the internal. So it's not, trust me, anybody who has prayed to God, you can say it's another way of asking the world to move them. It's like you're sitting on a chair asking, like praying, please, somebody, please, you know, pull me off this chair. And I'm not saying this in a derogatory way. I'm just simply saying that there are certain states of mind that unless you get up and leave that place, leave that state of mind, nothing's going to happen. You're going to remain in that kind of mode. Be free before you could not be. In other words, before you allow, like if your mind has had an ability to see such complex suffering, then it has an ability to see such complex joy. Anyways, guys, I'm going to end the talk here. Thanks for tuning in. Much blessings.